For the longest time, I kept this story to myself. It's embarrassing, unsettling, and quite frankly, hard to believe. But I need to share what happened with Azure Shores if I'm ever going to move forward with my life. Many of you are probably wondering, what's Azure Shores? That's a fair question. It was a trending hashtag back in 2019, primarily circulating in certain social media bubbles. I worked as a background content strategist for a collective of internet personalities. Not major celebrities, but they had substantial followings. They specialized in niche content areas, some focused on specific demographics, others on particular hobbies or social causes. These were creators who secured sponsorships by maintaining approachable personas, brand-safe content, and an air of authenticity. The reality, however, was far from authentic. Each had their own media coordination team with managers, image consultants, and various behind-the-scenes personnel ensuring their content was carefully curated before publication. I was part of this hidden machinery. For obvious reasons, I can't reveal their names. Some are still active online in various capacities. Others I'll refrain from mentioning out of respect for their families. Now, about Azure Shores. For months, our coordination teams had been struggling with what we called engagement fatigue. It was becoming increasingly difficult to organize individualized trips and content opportunities for creators spread across different continents. We had a sustainable fashion advocate in Vancouver and a home-style cooking personality in rural Georgia. You can imagine the logistical challenges. With audience interest waning, we needed something fresh to captivate followers. Someone pitched the idea of a joint destination event. We reached out to various resorts about potential partnership deals. We'd make their location look spectacular through our content, and in return, they'd provide accommodations. It seemed like the perfect solution, placing all our efforts into one basket to generate exceptional content. The problem was that no venues were interested. Then, during a brainstorming session, someone asked, "Does it have to be a real place?" It sounded ridiculous initially. Obviously, you can't visit somewhere that doesn't exist. But the more we contemplated it, the more we realized you could make anything seem as real as you wanted it to be. We could market it as exclusive, someone suggested. Invitation only. A private island concept, another added. We just need a name and a location. Maybe somewhere near the Maldives, Fiji, or Bali. Bali is in Indonesia, not where you're thinking. The audience won't know the difference. We eventually decided on a fictional island in the South Pacific. All we needed was a name. I'd been silent throughout the discussion, and the expectant pause was becoming uncomfortable. So I threw out the first thing that came to mind. Let's call it Azure Shores. Azure Shores became our make-or-break project. We developed increasingly elaborate details about this fictional paradise. Our culinary content creator prepared 3 seafood dishes and called them treasured recipes of the locals. One of our videographers mentioned we could edit footage to enhance the blue tones of the water, making them appear more vibrant than natural. We invented names for landmarks, hiking trails, and local fishing vessels. Every detail imaginable. We even compiled a list of exotic fruits supposedly native to the island. We crafted these falsehoods meticulously, preparing answers for any potential questions. The team became increasingly excited, applauding each other's fabrications. I distinctly remember when someone proposed the idea of crystal tide pools that would reflect the sunset in rainbow hues, claiming it represented the island's untouched natural beauty. I can't deny I was enthusiastic too. This was our business, and Azure Shores promised significant returns. Our influencers would certainly embrace it. We simply needed to frame everything in a way that portrayed them as inspirational figures, encouraging their followers to pursue extraordinary experiences and dream bigger. I was experiencing some personal difficulties during this time. I graduated with a communications degree. That's where I met my fiancé, Thomas. My career in social media management had been somewhat accidental. I've always been somewhat insecure about my appearance, and working alongside these polished, charismatic personalities made me feel included in an exclusive world I'd never previously accessed. Thomas couldn't quite understand this appeal. We argued frequently about my work. When your job revolves around social media, You're essentially always on duty. Spot something interesting while shopping, capture it, share it. Hear about a trendy new cafe downtown? Visit it, talk to the owner, establish a connection. People in my personal life grew tired of never having my undivided attention. They often felt secondary to my online responsibilities. When we launched our first Azure Shores content, my relationship deteriorated further. Thomas and I had our worst arguments yet. I thought our project was innovative, he considered it fraudulent. I argued we weren't selling any physical products, but he countered that we were selling an unattainable lifestyle. The tension escalated until we decided to postpone our wedding. In retrospect, it was fortunate we hadn't renewed our passports, or we would have lost thousands on a non-refundable honeymoon. We didn't officially separate, but the emotional distance between us grew increasingly insurmountable each day. Within approximately 2 weeks, the entire project unraveled. We were generating significant engagement and had several sponsorships lined up, but unexpected complications arose. For instance, another influencer network in Eastern Europe appropriated our concept. They created their own content featuring their creators supposedly visiting Azure Shores. They never consulted us, they simply copied our idea wholesale, not even attempting to be subtle about it. We encountered several other imitators on a smaller scale. Some individuals claimed on Twitter to have declined invitations to Azure Shores. Others mentioned being contacted about attending but declining for various reasons. A London-based musician announced her upcoming visit, only to cancel at the last minute while displaying a welcome package from the organizers during a live stream. But the situation deteriorated further. Scams began emerging. Fake contests and sweepstakes. Comment on this post for a chance to win a trip to Azure Shores promotions. Substantial money was changing hands. Our team panicked, we'd never authorized any of this. Our talent hadn't either. But what could we do? If we revealed the truth, our careers would be finished. One team member proposed a solution. We could visit a location resembling our fictional Azure Shores as closely as possible and present it as the real place. This would provide us plausible deniability. We could indicate a specific location on the map and claim that was our destination all along. We might admit to some creative liberties, but it would sufficiently cover our tracks. And remarkably, we discovered the perfect location. I never learned the actual name of this place. We all agreed to refer to it exclusively as Azure Shores to avoid any verbal slips. Everything happened rapidly. There was a conference call, discussion about flight arrangements, someone waiting to transport me. I lost my luggage at the airport, but there was no time to address this issue. My only priority was reaching our destination, after which everything would presumably resolve itself. I slept through most of the flight and barely registered the transfer. There was a boat journey somewhere along the way. The temperature shifted, and the language on signage appeared foreign. Within hours, I stood with my bare feet sinking into pristine white sand with striking blue undertones. They truly did have a blue tint. We had fabricated numerous details about Azure Shores. The blue-tinged beaches were one element, but we'd also invented what we called the morning mist, a refreshing seasonal phenomenon we'd claimed. A dense fog that rolled in from the shore each morning, creating a white, almost turquoise haze. But remarkably, this island actually did have a morning mist. I could barely see my hands before me as I walked through it. Seeing this place for the first time felt surreal. It seemed impossible that such locations could exist outside of digital manipulation. It was almost exactly as we described in our marketing materials. Blue-tinted sands, exotic fruit trees, vibrantly colored birds. No crystal tide pools, though. Then again, those were only visible at sunset. I couldn't believe our extraordinary luck. This might as well have been the actual Azure Shores of our imagination. Our group consisted of 16 people, including 4 influencers. The remainder of us operated behind the scenes. We all shared the same observation. It felt like stepping into a dream. It was flawless, and we recognized perfection when we saw it. Perfection was our business. No one greeted us upon arrival, so we were uncertain where to proceed. We assumed our luggage had been transported to the accommodations. Suspecting the resort staff had misunderstood our arrival time, We spent the afternoon relaxing by the water, watching waves gently lap against the shore. The scenery was genuinely breathtaking. I dozed off briefly while others attempted to contact the hotel management. Someone suggested walking, but we had camera equipment and limited patience. Besides, we weren't in any particular hurry. Mid-afternoon, Marcus woke me. Marcus was one of our videographers, a Southeast Asian man with distinctive round glasses. Regardless of what anyone said, he would simply nod and smile, not due to any communication barrier, but because he'd learned early in his career that it was generally best to maintain a positive attitude. Go with the flow. There are people coming, he said. I think we're heading out now. I groaned as I stood, only to see approximately a dozen strangers approaching our group. There were many smiles, embraces, and warm welcomes. Pleasant individuals. Then I realized these people weren't island residents. They weren't even staff. They were tourists. I can't believe we're actually here, someone exclaimed. I thought it might be a scam, another admitted. Honestly, I was convinced it wasn't real. People approached us, shaking hands and initiating conversations. All of them followed our content creators in some capacity. They immediately recognized our talent, who shot me pleading glances that silently communicated, "Please extract me from this situation." We took control of the situation, ensuring everyone had adequate personal space and clarifying that while we appreciated their enthusiasm, this was intended as a private event. The tourists weren't bothered. They remained elated by their surroundings. I can't believe we're really here, one repeated. It truly feels dreamlike. We decided to explore on foot. There was no purpose in remaining stationary, and we needed separation from the tourists. I couldn't comprehend our misfortune. This location had supposedly been thoroughly researched, and the probability of others discovering it simultaneously seemed astronomically improbable. It wasn't merely unlikely, it appeared virtually impossible. Eventually, Rachel, one of our talents, voiced her concerns. A petite woman in her early 30s with a commanding presence, she managed a lifestyle channel that blended relationship advice with fitness content. "Could whoever made the booking please contact the hotel?" she asked. "It's been hours." Everyone remained silent. None of us had a definitive answer. We gestured vaguely toward one another, assuming someone who hadn't accompanied us was responsible for the arrangements. But this raised an unsettling question. Everything had progressed with suspicious speed. Unusually so. We spent most of the afternoon and early evening following a winding path, picking fruit directly from trees, and drinking from island springs. We encountered additional tourists, but they didn't seem to recognize us. They didn't even speak our language. They simply appeared content with their surroundings. The entire experience was extraordinary. Physical fatigue seemed non-existent regardless of how far we walked. Hunger and thirst were barely noticeable. Fresh fruit hung from accessible branches, and exotic fragrances emanated from flowering plants. I remember a remarkable blue flower resembling a hibiscus that stood nearly as tall as me just off the pathway. Everything felt inexplicably right. Promoting such a destination would be effortless. However, I also noticed a peculiar quality about our surroundings, and I couldn't help observing its effect on my companions. I first noticed it with Marcus. He was examining his hand, repeatedly opening and closing his fingers, as if testing his sensory perception. When he noticed my observation, he reached out and placed his hand against my cheek. I instinctively recoiled slightly. "Sorry," he apologized. "I wasn't sure you were real." I dismissed it with nervous laughter, which he mirrored. We never located the hotel. We found several directional signs, but no one paid sufficient attention to follow them. Curiously, the pathways had identical names to those we'd invented during our brainstorming sessions. Some of these names hadn't even been publicly announced yet. As sunset approached, the island's atmosphere transformed. We could detect a faint luminescence emanating from the water, accompanied by a chorus of insect sounds in the distance. Even at its coolest, azure shores remained pleasantly temperate. Some individuals stripped down to their undergarments. The atmosphere resembled a spring break gathering, as if our professional purpose had been forgotten in favor of leisure. Some colleagues engaged in childish pranks. Two men went skinny dipping. One of our producers discovered a moss-covered area near a rock formation and napped. And Rachel, our dedicated fitness influencer, she was passionately embracing one of our social media managers. By the time I walked away, their interaction had progressed considerably. But I observed Marcus most carefully. Something about his behavior seemed increasingly concerning. He was peeling strips of bark from a tree and sharpening one end to a point. He repeatedly pricked his finger with it, apparently testing whether he could feel the sensation. I don't believe he could. His smile appeared unnaturally fixed. I struggled to maintain focus. I continuously shook my head, attempting to clear my thoughts. I probably appeared to be experiencing some neurological event, but I doubt anyone was paying attention. They were preoccupied with their own bizarre behaviors. As darkness fell over azure shores, I drifted to sleep on the soft moss. It provided the most comfortable rest I'd ever experienced. Perfect temperature, perfect softness. Who needed hotel accommodations anyway? By morning, the fog had returned. Visibility was severely limited. I could barely see my own hands. Momentarily, I couldn't recall my location or how I'd arrived there. I had to mentally reconstruct my journey. The flight, the boat transfer, everything seemed indistinct. All that mattered was my presence at Azure Shores. Everything else seemed inconsequential. The surroundings appeared enveloped in a gentle cloud. I could discern a few silhouettes in the distance but couldn't identify individuals. I remained seated, absorbing the atmosphere, consuming fresh fruit for breakfast, though I couldn't remember where I'd obtained it. When the morning mist finally dispersed, our group had diminished considerably. Some had wandered away, others had returned toward the main path. There were also hiking trails that I suspect some had followed. Both Rachel and Marcus were absent, and no one seemed to have established a plan. We were all distracted, myself included. As I wandered across the soft moss, feeling it between my toes, I attempted to recall what I'd packed. A pair of socks, a shirt, anything. I could vaguely visualize my suitcase but couldn't remember its contents. I remembered entering a taxi, or perhaps a rideshare service, but then encountered a mental blank space. I recalled checking in somewhere. Ticket, perhaps. I tried thinking about Thomas. We were officially still together, but something specific from our conversations nagged at me. Not our arguments, but something seemingly trivial. It bothered me persistently, like an unreachable mental itch. Eventually, I realized I'd been wandering aimlessly. I had no idea of my current location. The path had disappeared. My colleagues were gone. And yet, everything remained pleasant. It must have been approximately noon when I finally spotted other people in the distance. A small group gathered around a clearing. My initial impulse was to signal them, but my chest tightened with apprehension. Something about them seemed wrong. That moment of hesitation allowed me to notice several concerning details. All three individuals were completely unclothed, and they were strangers to me. There were two young men and an older woman. One man carried something in his right hand, and they were all looking downward. I remained hidden and listened from a distance. "It feels incredibly real," said the man holding an object. "Like I'm actually present." "It's remarkable," the older woman agreed. "It's perfect." They shared fruit and laughed together. I was preparing to reveal myself when I observed the man with the object turn slightly. He was holding what appeared to be a knife. He directed it toward something on the ground and made several violent motions. The others cheered his actions. "I've always wanted to do that," he smiled. "I love this place." They turned their attention northward, away from my position. They must have heard something. Chuckling among themselves, they departed, allowing me to cautiously investigate what they'd been doing. The tranquil tropical silence contrasted sharply with the disturbing scene I'd witnessed. I nearly choked when I discovered Rachel lying face down in the undergrowth, severely injured from multiple stab wounds. More visitors had arrived at Azure Shores that morning. It seemed as though everyone had received invitations and arrived simultaneously. They all expressed similar sentiments. This was a dream, too perfect to be genuine. They couldn't believe Azure Shores actually existed, and that they were privileged to experience it. For them, this reality seemed implausible. I remained near a path, observing and listening, hoping to encounter someone familiar. But maintaining concentration became increasingly difficult. The more I considered our situation, the more logical one explanation seemed. This must be a dream. I barely felt sensation when I pinched myself. Yet something within me resisted surrendering to this conclusion, despite its apparent simplicity. Throughout the day, I witnessed escalating violence. Smoke rose in the distance. By evening, when I returned to the beach, I observed two women in the ocean, attempting to submerge one another. They laughed and cheered as they fought, scratched, and strangled each other. They appeared barely affected by pain. It was merely an entertaining game to them. But when one disappeared beneath the surface and the bubbles ceased, the other continued laughing. The more people I encountered, the more disturbing their behavior appeared. Some had brought weapons to the island, like the man with the knife. One carried chains. Another had barbed wire. One individual paced along a hiking trail wielding what resembled a medieval weapon. Others seemed relatively harmless, casually conversing with people they recognized. But occasionally they would suddenly become violent, attacking seemingly at random. In the afternoon, I heard someone shout. They'd spotted one of our content creators. I believe it was our cooking personality. Suddenly people rushed toward her location, cheering as they bounded across the sands. "I've always wanted to meet her," someone remarked. "She has such a wonderful presence." "I absolutely detest her," another muttered. Self-absorbed egotist. They appeared to be verbalizing their thoughts without filter. This wasn't conversation. It was an uncontrolled stream of consciousness. I followed them for a period. A few probably noticed me but showed no interest. I wasn't the celebrity they sought. I was unremarkable among them. I hesitated to intervene, considering the numerical disadvantage. However, while observing from a distance, I failed to monitor my immediate surroundings, where a familiar figure approached stealthily. I didn't notice Marcus until he stood directly beside me. I barely recognized him. He had fashioned a weapon from a broken camera tripod, and he was partially covered in dried blood. Nevertheless, his demeanor remained eerily calm. His eyelids drooped lazily like a contented cat resting in sunshine. He reached toward me, and I instinctively recoiled, but he could have plunged his improvised weapon into my neck instantly. I remained motionless. He slowly brushed a bloodied hand across my cheek. "Nothing more. I've always wanted to do that," he whispered. "Your skin looks so soft." He pressed his nose against my ear and exhaled softly, then stepped away. "You're very nice," he murmured. "I like you." That concluded our interaction. He wandered away, having acted upon his intrusive thoughts. Perhaps I was fortunate that his interest in me extended no further. Perhaps, to him, my apparent softness was simply a passing curiosity. Others weren't as fortunate. The mob captured our cooking personality and dragged her from the wooded area. There was cheering, accompanied by a scream. They had bound her to a wooden pole and paraded her across the blue-tinged sands like a trophy. "None of this is real," she screamed. "It was never real. We invented everything. We completely fabricated it." I couldn't bear to watch. Someone wielded a knife. Another brandished a spear. Others recorded with their mobile phones. Her screams became increasingly frantic before abruptly ceasing. They left her tied to the post as they celebrated around a fire. Everyone wanted to participate. Some were devoted fans. Others simply wanted to witness violence against a public figure. They organized search parties to locate the remaining influencers. Most tourists had abandoned any semblance of civilization, instead writhing and howling on the beach like feral creatures. I must have remained hidden for hours before someone noticed me. A middle-aged man with unkempt hair and intense eyes. I couldn't identify what he was consuming, but it smelled like charred meat. "Join us by the fire," he invited. "It's perfect here." I wanted to refuse, to escape, but maintaining anonymity seemed critical to survival. If I pretended compliance, I might gain time to formulate an escape plan. So despite every instinct urging retreat, I suppressed my fear. "All right," I agreed. "I'll do that." He accepted my response without hesitation. They had constructed a second fire on the beach. They danced and sang around it. Some had brought bottles containing what appeared to be hard liquor. It was a chaotic display of uninhibited impulses ranging from violence to carnal indulgence. I sat near the fire, hoping to remain unnoticed within the background activity. The strategy seemed effective. I sat staring into the flames, where charred human remains were clearly visible among the embers. I remained awake throughout the night. I waited until the bone fragments had crumbled to ash and the morning mist began rolling in. It was like watching the island being enveloped in a protective shroud. But there was something additional I noticed now that I paid closer attention. People were moving in and out of the fog, arriving and departing. Some vanished into the mist, while others materialized from nowhere. Boats or aircraft couldn't possibly operate at such frequency. I could draw only one conclusion. Azure Shores was unquestionably not real. This couldn't possibly be reality. I contemplated surrendering to the illusion. The others seemed to embrace it effortlessly. They accepted everything at face value. Love, hatred, violence, they experienced it all without consequence. But I remained too conscious of the deception. I recognized Azure Shores for what it truly was, and regardless of how many times I ventured into the morning mist, it wouldn't release me. That morning, I identified what had been troubling me. The passports. Thomas and I hadn't renewed our passports. International travel should have been impossible for me. Somehow, I must have subconsciously recognized this inconsistency. Perhaps that's why I remained less affected than others. I harbored this persistent incongruity that I couldn't dismiss. But now that I'd consciously realized this fact, did that mean I would become as susceptible as everyone else? Part 15: The Madness. The island had numerous new arrivals. People continued appearing and disappearing. Some contentedly relaxed on the beach, basking in sunshine. Others were subjected to horrific violence. It was an absurd juxtaposition of experiences. Two individuals strolling hand in hand along the shoreline, discussing entertainment preferences. Meanwhile, at the tree line, someone crafting a weapon from human remains. I didn't escape unscathed either. One woman became fixated on my hair and forcibly removed a handful. A young man approached me without provocation and repeatedly kicked me until he grew bored. I had rocks thrown at me, not necessarily with intent to injure, but as part of some competition or wager. But conditions continued deteriorating. Each hour brought further escalation, further regression into primitive behavior. By nightfall, the luminescent waters were stained dark. People were bound to burning palm trees, resulting in charred corpses. Some howled at the sky and attacked each other with primitive weapons fashioned from stone and bone. They painted themselves with ash and blood. Screams and laughter merged indistinguishably. To them, everything was merely a dream without consequences. I found a depression in the ground and covered myself with palm fronds, hoping to survive until morning. I couldn't risk exposure. People were being attacked indiscriminately, and I couldn't predict the consequences of discovery. They had largely abandoned language. Some merely screamed or growled at one another. A few coherent voices ranted deliriously about cosmic deities and celestial destruction. Then an unexpected sound. Part 16: The Connection. My cell phone. I'd forgotten its existence. I assumed the battery had depleted long ago, but apparently it hadn't. The signal indicator showed no reception, yet I received a text message. I viewed it with the screen inches from my face. It was from Thomas. "I know we need space, but I miss you." That was the entire message. I attempted to respond but couldn't. No signal. I clutched the phone against my chest, feeling my heartbeat against my hands. People ran back and forth just feet from my hiding place. They were destroying trees, creating primitive tools, dismantling the island, each other, and themselves. Everything served as fuel for their destructive impulses. Then someone peered downward. I glimpsed pale eyes through gaps in the fronds. It was a young man, perhaps 20 years old. Half his scalp was shaved, with a deep laceration across his eyebrow. Blood continuously dripped into his left eye, causing him to blink spasmodically. "Little hiding woman in her secret place," he said. "Is that as deep as you can go?" I remained silent. I looked up at him, hoping my lack of response would eventually bore him. But my strategy failed. He straightened his posture and retrieved something elongated and sharp. "Let's extract you from there, hiding woman." Part 17, The Turning Point. An improvised spear crafted from a plastic rod. The first thrust pierced my left bicep, striking a nerve. The second strike landed inches from my ear, causing several strands of hair to adhere to the mud. The third penetrated the edge of my shoulder, creating a superficial wound. Everything happened too rapidly for considered reaction. Before I could defend myself, something unexpected occurred. The young man, like many others, became a victim himself. A swift strike to his throat. He clutched his neck and collapsed into my hiding place, warm blood pooling across my torso. Desperate fingers clawed at me, silently pleading for assistance. His attacker approached for a closer inspection. It was Marcus. He observed both me and his victim with apparent indifference. It seemed he'd witnessed and perpetrated so much violence that this incident registered as mundane, barely a conscious action. He leaned slightly closer for a better view and smiled faintly. He apparently recognized me. As before, he simply wandered away. I remained motionless with a dying man atop me, waiting for the night to end. I simply needed to survive until morning. I gripped my phone until my fingers cramped and closed my eyes. Sleep eluded me, and a kaleidoscope of screams and celebrations filled my mind with unspeakable imagery. Throughout it all, I endured. People rushing past failed to notice me. They perceived only a dead man resting on a bed of palm fronds. Part 18, The Escape. By morning, I had formulated a plan. People who embraced the Azure Shores fantasy seemed capable of arriving and departing at will. Each time the morning mist appeared, something significant occurred. I would make one final, desperate attempt. A genuine, determined effort. I made my way to the beach. The pain from my injuries was dulled but persistent. A gentle breeze disturbed my exposed hair. I retrieved my phone, activated the front-facing camera, and began recording. Despite the absence of signal, the video began streaming. "Hello, everyone," I exclaimed, summoning every ounce of enthusiasm possible. "Thanks for joining me. Here I am, living my best life at Azure Shores. Just look at this incredible beach. Who would ever want to leave this paradise? Right?" I had no certainty anyone was watching. Perhaps there was no audience, but the camera felt like a window, peering directly into my soul. "Right?" I repeated desperately. I maintained my smile as long as possible. The video connection terminated as the battery failed completely. Then, a gunshot. A young man at the edge of the tree line, where the morning mist began. The same one who had attacked Rachel. "Parasites everywhere," he muttered. I didn't immediately register dropping to one knee. I couldn't regain my footing. Clutching my abdomen, I crawled away from the beach and into the ocean. Only then did I realize I'd been shot in the stomach. The salt water intensified the pain of my wound. Azure Shores was perfect. It was beautiful. It was everything we needed it to be, and it would return me home. I just needed to believe completely. I demonstrated loyalty, and it would reward me. It had to. Please, it had to. I took one final breath as my head submerged beneath the surface. Mist. Part 19, The Space Between. In the void between Azure Shores and reality, there exists something beyond human comprehension. Something that hears our desires and manifests them. As children wish upon stars, adults wish upon likes and shares, praying for fulfillment of our desperate wants. Wealth, love, fame, the same fundamental desires, merely directed toward different celestial bodies. It simply provided what we requested, without malevolence, just a paradise island bathed in sunshine. Salt water filled my ears. I could hear my heartbeat slowing. Pressure built in my skull as I descended deeper. A fog enveloped my vision, I reached outward, hoping. Part 20. The return. The fog dissipated. I was crawling. The sand had transformed into concrete. Pleasant warmth gave way to biting cold. The surroundings were barren yet familiar. I had traversed this driveway countless times. I had returned home. I called out to Thomas, and he heard me. And despite the gunshot wound, the stab injuries, and the contusions, one comforting thought remained. I managed to verbalize it aloud. I received your message. Part 21. The aftermath. I had been missing for days. I had simply walked out of our home and vanished. No one had seen or heard from me. I had simply disappeared. They had been searching for me. From my hospital bed, I attempted to track the fates of my colleagues. Most were deceased. Our cooking personality had died in a house fire. Rachel had been fatally shot. Others had fallen asleep while driving, resulting in fatal accidents. But these weren't reported as mysterious deaths under suspicious circumstances. They were documented as ordinary tragedies. People perish in fires and vehicular accidents every day. I provided no answer when asked who shot me. I simply stated that someone emerged from the fog. Partial truth, at least. Marcus, however, remained missing. I suspect he continues to inhabit Azure Shores, living his ideal existence. That video of me on the beach of Azure Shores still exists somewhere. It's authentic. You can observe the mist and the blue-tinted sand. I've seen automated networks reproduce fragments of it in algorithmically generated compilation videos. But the hashtag has vanished. The promotional materials, too. I believe our sponsors completely purged all search engine optimization from the internet. I've returned to academia since then, pursuing a graduate degree. If this experience has taught me anything, it's that I possess strong listening skills that I should develop professionally. But you won't find me engaging in comment sections anymore. Thomas and I married. My physical injuries have healed, but I still experience emotional distress when encountering mentions of my former colleagues. I occasionally see their images in thumbnails for content like Top 50 Social Media Personality Tragedies and similar exploitative material. I believe those blue-tinged beaches still exist somewhere, and the crystal tide pools. But honestly, I've begun forgetting the sensations. Perhaps that's the cost of turning away from Azure Shores. Memories fade. That's partly why I felt compelled to document this experience. But if there's one lesson I've learned, one I'll never forget, it's this. When you build your career on deception, you shouldn't expect reality to remain kind.